Have you ever seen a strategy backfire so spectacularly that it ends up fueling the very competitor it was meant to contain? For decades, the phrase America First has resonated through the halls of Washington as a promise to bring manufacturing back home. But as we sit here in late 2025, the numbers tell a story that few in the Oval Office are willing to admit. U.S. manufacturing activity has just contracted for its ninth consecutive month. This is not just a minor dip in the economic cycle. It is the longest stretch of industrial decline our country has faced since the dark days of the 2008 financial crisis. While Washington doubles down on aggressive tariffs and emergency declarations, something historic is happening across our northern border. Canada, once thought to be the vulnerable junior partner in this trade relationship, is witnessing a record-breaking surge in foreign investment. The numbers are staggering, with total foreign direct investment reaching nearly $1.5 trillion. While American factories are thinning their ranks and reducing shifts, global corporations are quietly setting up their safe havens on Canadian soil. Capital does not follow slogans. It follows stability and predictability. Today, we are peeling back the layers of a geopolitical backfire that is reshaping the North American landscape faster than anyone anticipated. From Costco's massive legal revolt against the U.S. government to the secret energy pivot in Newfoundland, the landscape is changing. We are revealing how the attempt to corner Canada has created a stronger, more self-reliant competitor right at our own border. Washington expected a defensive crouch from Ottawa, but instead they found an economy that was ready to decouple from American volatility. This is the story of how policy risk became the new primary driver of the North American economy. The USMCA 2026 threat. It started as a quiet warning in policy circles, but by December 2025, it became a deafening alarm. U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer recently confirmed what many in the business world feared the most. The United States is officially ready to let the USMCA trade deal expire or withdraw from it entirely by 2026. Greer's argument is simple and follows the current political logic of the Capitol. He claims the agreement is only worth keeping if it is a good deal for America on every front. But what Washington calls a good deal is being viewed by international investors as an unacceptable policy risk. When you threaten to blow up the economic framework of an entire continent, the biggest casualty is the certainty that global business requires to survive. Manufacturing is a game of decades, not months, and uncertainty is the poison that kills long-term planning. The International Monetary Fund recently pointed out that U.S. tariffs, while meant to protect domestic industries, have actually disrupted tightly integrated supply chains. This disruption has sent input costs for raw materials skyrocketing for American firms. It is making it harder for our domestic companies to compete on the global stage against foreign rivals who do not face these taxes. Instead of caving to the pressure, Canadian officials have welcomed an IMF assessment that validated Canada's unexpected resilience. Canada is not just waiting to see what Washington does next or hoping for a change in tone. They have already begun building their own economic fortress, independent of American approval. The manufacturing exodus. The most visible sign of this policy backfire can be found in the declining numbers of the U.S. industrial sector. For 9 straight months, the Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index has remained stuck in contraction territory. Companies in the transportation equipment sector are leading this industrial retreat. These firms are the backbone of the American heartland, yet they are the ones feeling the most pain. Faced with rising costs of steel and aluminum due to heavy tariffs, these firms are forced to make impossible choices. They are reducing their American workforce and quietly relocating their future operations overseas. But overseas does not always mean the far-off factories of China or the emerging hubs of Vietnam anymore. In late 2025, overseas increasingly means moving just a few hours north into Canada. Global corporations are discovering that Canada offers a global shield that the U.S. domestic market currently lacks. By moving production to Canada, these firms can still access the North American consumer while protecting themselves from volatile policy swings. They are shielding their balance sheets from the sudden emergency declarations and tariff shocks coming out of Washington. It is a strategic migration of capital and labor that is draining the very industrial base Washington claims to be protecting. Every factory that opens in Ontario or Quebec is often a factory that decided not to expand in Ohio or Michigan. The empty parking lots in our industrial towns are the silent witnesses to this shifting reality. Canada's FDI magnet. While the U.S. landscape appears increasingly volatile and unpredictable, Canada has positioned itself as the new focal point for predictability. In 2025 alone, foreign firms moved a massive $77.8 billion into the Canadian economy. This brings the total foreign direct investment to nearly $1.5 trillion. This figure has exceeded even the most optimistic internal projections from the Canadian government. Canada now holds the second highest foreign direct investment to GDP ratio in the entire G20. Firms from Japan, South Korea, and throughout Europe are establishing Canadian bases at an unprecedented rate. These companies still want to be physically close to the American consumer, but they no longer want to be legally entangled in American trade wars. Canada's network of over 50 free trade agreements allows these firms to export globally without the constant fear of a sudden policy reset. For a global CEO, the choice has become increasingly clear and data-driven. You can invest in a market that might change its trade rules overnight by social media posts. Or you can invest in a jurisdiction that offers a stable gateway to the world. This capital flight is not just about taxes. It is about the fundamental need for a predictable business environment. And right now, Canada is winning that competition for trust. The Costco rebellion. The tension is not just happening at the border crossings. It is breaking out in the American courtroom. In late 2025, Costco initiated a massive legal challenge against the U.S. government over tariff refunds. This is a historic moment because Costco is one of the most respected and stable retailers in the world. The retail giant argues that the current tariff structure is not only harming the American consumer, but is being applied in a way that violates established trade laws. Costco is not alone in this sentiment of frustration and economic pain. Dozens of other major American corporations are joining the legal fray, demanding settlements that could be massive. These lawsuits could place a multi-billion-dollar financial burden on the U.S. Treasury at a time when the deficit is already a concern. This legal revolt highlights a growing divide between Washington's political goals and the economic reality of American business. When a company as large as Costco is forced to sue its own government to remain competitive, it signals a deep breakdown in our domestic trade environment. It is a sign that the cost of protection has finally become too high for the very companies it was meant to help. American business leaders are tired of being used as pawns in a geopolitical game that hurts their bottom line. The courtroom is becoming the new battlefield where the true cost of these trade wars is finally being calculated. The 50th state rhetoric. The rhetoric coming out of Washington has only added fuel to the fire and deepened the divide. President Donald Trump's suggestion that Canada should be treated like a 51st state was intended as a display of ultimate power. However, in the world of high-level international diplomacy, it landed with a dull and dangerous thud. The comment sent a wave of anxiety through diplomatic channels and startled investors who rely on the stability of sovereign partnerships. It implied that the rules of international trade could be replaced by a relationship of dominance and submission. Canadian officials responded with a quiet but firm reaffirmation of their own economic footing. The Minister of Industry emphasized that Canada has absolutely no interest in backing down or becoming a vassal of American policy. This exchange only served to accelerate Canada's internal reconstruction of its own industrial capabilities. A recent survey revealed that over 70% of Canadian manufacturers now support government incentives for nearshoring and domestic supply chain localization. The result is a Canada that is becoming more self-reliant and less dependent on U.S. components with every passing month. Washington thought they were showing strength, but they were actually pushing Canada to find its own path. The rhetoric of the 51st state may have played well to some domestic crowds, but it cost the U.S. a lot of influence on the global stage. The Great Energy Pivot. Nowhere is Canada's new economic independence more obvious than in the energy sector. For decades, the United States was the primary and often the only customer for Canadian oil and gas. But the strategy designed to corner Canada has forced a dramatic shift in how Canadian resources are distributed globally. In Newfoundland and Labrador, an extraordinary transformation is unfolding before our eyes. More than half of the region's oil production is now flowing across the Atlantic to Europe. Compare that to just a few years ago, when less than 10% of its output crossed the ocean. As Europe searches for stable energy alternatives to global hotspots, Canada has stepped in to fill that massive void. This newfound flexibility has significantly reduced the economic vulnerability that Washington once believed it could exploit. Canada is no longer a captive supplier to the American market that has to take whatever price we offer. They are becoming a global energy powerhouse with a diverse and growing list of international clients. By the time Washington realizes the leverage is gone, Canada will have established permanent trade routes with our global rivals. This is the ultimate example of how a pressure tactic can force a partner to become a competitor. The retail warning signs. Back home in the US, the consumer side of our economy is beginning to show real signs of strain and fatigue. Cyber Monday sales have long been a key indicator of household confidence and discretionary spending power. In late 2025, these sales rose by only 2.6%, a figure that is deeply concerning. This modest increase, which barely keeps pace with inflation, suggests that rising trade tensions and tariff fears are finally hitting the American kitchen table. The average family is now feeling the squeeze of higher prices for everyday goods. Budgets are tightening as consumers anticipate even higher prices for imported goods in the coming year. They are also worried about domestic products that rely on global components, which are also rising in price. The uncertainty that has seeped into the corporate boardroom is now making its way into the average American home. When households start cutting back on spending due to trade-related fears, the entire economy feels the contraction. It is a ripple effect that starts at the border crossings and ends at the local checkout counter in your town. We are seeing a slow-motion collision between political strategy and the daily reality of the American taxpayer. The new industrial map. As Canada diversifies its global outreach, the regional balance of power in North America is shifting in a permanent way. Technology and advanced research exports in Canada are now climbing at a pace that exceeds traditional commodities like timber or grain. A new economic layer is forming north of our border, centered on innovation, engineering, and specialized manufacturing. Critical industries like electric vehicles and mineral production are growing rapidly as global companies seek reliable sources for essential materials. Canada's trade agreements offer advantages in regions where U.S. firms are beginning to lose their preferential access. The trajectory of Washington's approach has diverged sharply from its intended outcome. A policy meant to force alignment is instead accelerating Canada's evolution into a major independent supply chain hub. Washington may soon face the unintended consequence of weakening its own leadership position in North America. We are watching the redrawing of the industrial map in real time. The Midwest was once the heart of the continent's manufacturing, but that heart is now beating faster in places like Ontario. This is not a temporary shift. It is the construction of a new economic reality. The 2026 review. All eyes in the world of trade are now focused on the upcoming 2026 review of the USMCA. U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra has recently attempted to ease public speculation that the U.S. plans to dissolve the agreement entirely. He insists the review is simply a standard part of the original terms and will explore multiple paths before a final decision is made. But the ambiguity remains. And in the world of global finance, ambiguity is the primary enemy of investment. The national security strategy of the United States has also raised major alarms in Ottawa and Mexico City. It contains language that allows for broad interpretations of how Washington might influence domestic Canadian affairs. Former Canadian diplomats have warned that this strategy could encourage direct interference in Canadian political interests. This lack of a categorical assurance from Washington has only intensified the heated debate in Canada. As both countries prepare for a politically intense year ahead, the partnership that has defined the continent for decades is shifting. It is moving away from cooperation and toward a state of constant, guarded negotiation. The 2026 review will not just be about trade, it will be about the future of the North American alliance itself. The attempt to exert extreme pressure on an external partner has evolved into an internal catalyst for economic restructuring. Washington's strategy was designed to make Canada feel its economic vulnerability and force it to yield. Instead, it has highlighted the deep vulnerabilities within the United States' own industrial and consumer base. As Canada positions itself as a focal point for predictability and global access, American leadership faces a fundamental choice. Will we continue down a path of volatility that pushes our jobs, our capital, and our talent across the border? Or will we recognize that a strong, independent, and stable neighbor is a much better partner than a cornered competitor? The answer to that question will determine the economic health of North America for the next generation. Is the attempt to protect American jobs actually pushing them across the border into the arms of our neighbor? How does this massive policy shift affect your local community's future and your own cost of living? We want to hear your thoughts on this unfolding story in the comments below. To stay updated on every turn in the North American trade war, make sure to subscribe and follow this channel. The shift in manufacturing we are seeing today is just the beginning of a much larger trend. Watch our next deep dive into the Canada-Europe Energy Alliance to see how the global map is being redrawn without Washington's input. Thank you for tuning in to this special report, and we will see you in the next one.